Anger rarely announces itself loudly at first. It begins as a tightness in the chest, a restless thought, a quiet feeling that something is wrong. Someone speaks carelessly, someone disrespects you, someone ignores your effort, misunderstands your intention, or treats you unfairly, and suddenly your peace feels stolen. Buddhism teaches that anger is not caused by people, words, or situations. It is caused by our attachment to how things should be. As the Buddha reminded us, you will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger. The purpose of these teachings is not to suppress anger or pretend you are unaffected. It is to free you from being controlled by others' behavior. When you understand these lessons deeply, you do not become cold or indifferent. You become unshakable. What once disturbed you no longer has access to your inner world. 1. Understand that anger is a reaction, not a truth. Buddhism teaches that anger is not a voice of wisdom or clarity, even though it often feels convincing in the moment. Anger is a conditioned reaction, something that arises automatically when our expectations are not met, when our ego feels threatened, or when we fear losing respect, control, or security. From a Buddhist perspective, anger does not come from the outside world. It is created inside the mind. When someone says or does something that disturbs you, the event itself is neutral. The real trigger is the meaning your mind immediately attaches to it. Your thoughts begin to form a story. They disrespected me. They shouldn't have said that. This is unfair. As if it were the only natural response. The Buddha reminded us that thoughts are not facts. They are mental events that arise due to past conditioning, habits, and emotional patterns. Just because a thought feels strong does not mean it is true or deserving of your trust. Anger often feels justified because the mind presents it as protection, but in reality, it is only a reflex, not a reflection of truth. When you pause and observe anger carefully, you begin to notice that it is unstable. It changes, intensifies, weakens, and eventually fades if it is not constantly fed by thinking. This shows that anger is not who you are, and it is not a permanent state. It is something that happens to you, not something that defines you. The moment you recognize anger as a temporary reaction rather than a righteous response, its grip begins to loosen. You stop automatically siding with it. Instead of asking, "Why are they like this?" or "Why did they do this to me?" you gently turn inward and ask, "Why am I giving this situation so much power over my peace?" This shift is crucial in Buddhism because it moves you from blame to awareness. Awareness creates distance, and distance creates freedom. You no longer feel compelled to react immediately or defend every emotional impulse. With repeated awareness, anger loses its authority, and you begin to experience a calm that does not depend on other people's behavior. This understanding alone marks the beginning of true inner peace. 2. Realize that people can only act from their own conditioning. Buddhism teaches that every human being moves through life shaped by causes and conditions. No one speaks, reacts, or behaves from a blank slate. Each person carries their past experiences, emotional wounds, fears, beliefs, habits, and unexamined thoughts into every interaction. When someone behaves in a way that angers or hurts you, Buddhism invites you to look deeper than the surface action. Their words are not appearing out of nowhere. They are emerging from a lifetime of conditioning that you may never fully see or understand. Most anger arises because we assume that others should know better, behave better, or treat us more fairly. But this assumption ignores a central Buddhist insight. People can only act from the level of awareness they currently possess. Someone who is insecure will speak defensively. Someone who is afraid will try to control. Someone who is emotionally wounded may project their pain outward without realizing it. Their behavior is not a deliberate attempt to disturb your peace. It is an expression of their inner state. When you truly understand this, anger begins to soften into clarity. This does not mean that harmful behavior becomes acceptable or that boundaries are unnecessary. Buddhism does not teach passive tolerance of mistreatment. What it teaches is emotional freedom. When you stop expecting unconscious people to act consciously, you stop being shocked by their behavior. You no longer take it personally. You see their actions as symptoms rather than attacks. This shift protects your inner peace while still allowing you to respond wisely and firmly when needed. Anger thrives on personalization. It grows stronger when you believe, "They did this to me." Compassion grows when you see they are acting from their pain, confusion, or limitation. Compassion in Buddhism is not about excusing wrongdoing. It is about freeing yourself from unnecessary emotional suffering. When you understand that another person's behavior says more about their inner world than about your worth, you stop carrying their emotional burden. With this understanding, you begin to respond instead of react. You may choose silence. You may choose distance. You may choose calm communication. But whatever you choose, it comes from awareness, not emotional fire. Over time, this perspective trains your mind to remain steady, even in difficult interactions. You stop demanding that people be different, so you can be peaceful. You realize that peace comes from understanding reality as it is. This realization alone dissolves much of the anger that once felt unavoidable and allows you to move through life with greater patience, strength, and inner balance. 3. Drop the illusion that life owes you fairness. One of the deepest roots of anger, according to Buddhism, is the hidden belief that life should be fair, that people should act justly, and that good intentions should always be rewarded with good outcomes. This belief often lives quietly in the mind, shaping expectations without being questioned. When life unfolds in a way that contradicts these expectations, anger arises. You feel wronged, frustrated, or betrayed not only by people, but by life itself. Buddhism gently invites you to examine this belief and see it clearly, because clinging to the idea of fairness creates constant inner resistance. The Buddha taught that life operates through causes and conditions, not personal contracts. Things happen because certain conditions are present, not because they are deserved. Sometimes kind people are misunderstood. Sometimes effort is ignored. Sometimes those who cause harm appear to succeed. When the mind insists that reality should align with its moral expectations, suffering follows. Anger becomes a protest against what is happening. But that protest does not change reality. It only disturbs the mind. When you release the demand that life treat you fairly, something unexpected happens. You do not become bitter or hopeless. Instead, you become lighter. You stop arguing with reality. You stop replaying events in your mind, asking why things happened the way they did. Acceptance in Buddhism is not weakness or surrender. It is the clear recognition of what is present, without resistance or self-deception. When you accept what is happening as it is, rather than how you wish it were, anger has no place to settle. Much of anger comes from comparison. You compare your efforts to others' rewards, your pain to others' ease, your intentions to others' recognition. Buddhism teaches that comparison is a form of attachment that distorts perception. The moment you stop measuring your life against imagined standards of fairness, you regain inner stability. You focus on what you can control: your actions, your values, your awareness, rather than what you cannot control, such as others' behavior or outcomes. Dropping the illusion of fairness also deepens compassion. When you understand that life is unpredictable and shaped by countless unseen factors, you become less judgmental toward yourself and others. You stop blaming yourself for outcomes that were never fully in your control. You stop blaming others for failing to meet expectations they never agreed to fulfill. In this understanding, anger slowly dissolves, replaced by resilience and calm. You learn to move with life instead of fighting it, and in doing so, you discover a peace that does not depend on fairness, approval, or external validation. 4. Observe anger without identifying with it. One of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism is the practice of observation without identification. This teaching alone can transform your relationship with anger completely. Most people suffer not because anger appears, but because they immediately merge with it. The moment anger arises, the mind says, "I am angry," and without realizing it, you step inside the emotion. You defend it, justify it, and act from it. Buddhism teaches a different approach, one that brings freedom instead of suppression. It teaches you to observe anger as an experience, not as an identity. Anger, like all mental states, arises due to conditions. It comes into existence when certain thoughts, memories, expectations, or triggers are activated. When those conditions change, anger also changes. This means anger is impermanent. It is not solid, fixed, or permanent, even though it feels overwhelming in the moment. When you observe anger closely, you begin to notice that it behaves like a wave. It rises, intensifies, shifts, and eventually fades if it is not constantly fed by mental storytelling. This observation alone weakens its grip because you are no longer trapped inside it. The Buddha taught mindfulness as the art of clear seeing. When anger appears, mindfulness allows you to say quietly within yourself, "Anger is present." This simple sentence creates distance. You are no longer claiming ownership of the emotion. You are acknowledging its presence without letting it define you. This distance is crucial. Without it, anger controls your speech, your body, and your decisions. With it, you regain choice. You may still feel heat in the body or tension in the chest, but you are no longer compelled to react impulsively. Identification strengthens anger. The more you think, "This is happening to me," or "I have every right to feel this way," the more energy you give to the emotion. Buddhism does not deny emotions, but it warns against clinging to them. When you cling to anger, it becomes heavy and persistent. When you observe it without judgment, it becomes lighter and temporary. Observation turns anger into information rather than a command. It tells you that something within you has been touched, but it does not tell you how to act. As you practice observing anger, you begin to notice its physical sensations. You may feel tightness in the jaw, pressure in the chest, heat in the face, or restlessness in the body. Buddhism encourages staying with these sensations gently, without labeling them as good or bad. Sensations, like emotions, arise and pass. When you stay present with them instead of resisting or suppressing them, they naturally dissolve. This teaches the mind that anger does not need to be feared or acted upon. It can be experienced fully without causing harm. Over time, this practice changes your entire relationship with emotions. Anger may still arise, but it no longer controls you. You stop being afraid of your own reactions. You stop judging yourself for feeling disturbed. Instead, you meet anger with curiosity and patience. This calm observation prevents regretful words, damaged relationships, and inner turmoil. It allows wisdom to arise naturally, without force. In Buddhism, freedom is not achieved by eliminating emotions, but by understanding them deeply. When you observe anger without identifying with it, you break the habit of emotional slavery. You realize that you are the awareness in which anger appears, not the anger itself. This realization is profoundly liberating. It creates a calm inner space that remains untouched even when strong emotions pass through. From this space, you respond with clarity rather than react with impulse. And in that clarity, anger loses its authority over your life. 5. Let go of the need to win, prove, or be understood. One of the most subtle but powerful sources of anger, according to Buddhism, is the constant inner need to win, to prove that you are right, or to be fully understood by others. This need often hides beneath the surface, disguised as self-respect or justice. You feel angry not only because of what someone said or did, but because you want them to see your side, acknowledge your effort, admit their mistake, or validate your feelings. When this validation does not come, frustration grows and anger takes root. Buddhism teaches that this craving for recognition is a form of attachment, and attachment always leads to suffering. The mind often believes that peace will arrive once the other person understands you. You replay conversations in your head, imagining what you should have said or how they should have responded. This mental repetition keeps anger alive long after the situation has passed. Buddhism points out that this is not resolution, it is self-inflicted disturbance. The truth is that not everyone has the capacity, emotional maturity, or awareness to understand you. Some people are listening only to respond, not to comprehend. When you expect understanding from those who are unable or unwilling to give it, you place your peace in their hands. Letting go of the need to win does not mean you accept falsehood or injustice. It means you recognize that inner peace is more valuable than being right. The Buddha taught that clinging to opinions and views hardens the mind. When you hold tightly to the idea that you must prove yourself, anger becomes a constant companion because reality rarely aligns with ego-driven expectations. By releasing the urge to convince, argue, or dominate, you soften the mind and allow calm to return naturally. Much anger is fueled by the silent question, "Why don't they see me?" Buddhism answers this by reminding us that visibility is not guaranteed and understanding cannot be forced. When you stop needing others to validate your experience, you reclaim emotional independence. You no longer measure your worth through others' responses. You begin to trust your own awareness. This shift is deeply liberating because it removes the emotional hook that others unknowingly use to disturb your peace. The desire to prove yourself also keeps you trapped in conflict. Every disagreement becomes a battle. Every misunderstanding becomes a personal threat. Buddhism teaches that the self is not something that needs constant defense. When you let go of defending your image, your opinions, and your pride, anger has no structure to stand on. You can listen without reacting, speak without aggression, and walk away without resentment. Silence becomes easier, not because you are weak, but because you are no longer driven by ego. Over time, letting go of this need transforms your relationships. You become calmer in conversations, less reactive to criticism, and more patient with differences. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. This does not make you passive, it makes you selective. You choose peace over pointless conflict. You choose clarity over emotional exhaustion. In Buddhism, freedom is not found in being understood by everyone, but in understanding yourself deeply. When you release the need to win, prove, or be validated, anger loses one of its strongest anchors. What remains is a quiet confidence, rooted in awareness rather than approval. From this place, you move through life with dignity and calm, untouched by the opinions, reactions, or limitations of others. 6. Accept that control is an illusion. One of the deepest reasons anger keeps returning is the unconscious belief that you should be able to control people, situations, and outcomes if you think hard enough, explain clearly enough, or behave correctly enough. Buddhism gently but firmly dismantles this belief. It teaches that trying to control what is inherently uncontrollable is one of the main causes of mental suffering. Anger often appears when reality refuses to obey your expectations. Someone behaves differently than you hoped. A situation unfolds in a way you did not plan. Words are misunderstood. Effort is not rewarded. In these moments, anger is not just an emotion. It is resistance to reality. The Buddha taught that life unfolds according to causes and conditions far beyond any single person's influence. Every situation is shaped by countless factors: past actions, other people's states of mind, timing, environment, chance, and unseen circumstances. When you believe you should be able to control the outcome, you unknowingly set yourself up for frustration. The mind tightens, trying to force order onto something fluid. When that force fails, anger emerges as a protest. But this protest does not restore control. It only creates inner conflict. Much anger is rooted in the desire to control how others think or feel about you. You want to be respected, appreciated, understood, or treated fairly. When people fail to meet these expectations, anger feels justified. Buddhism teaches that this desire is natural, but clinging to it creates suffering. You cannot control another person's awareness, emotional maturity, or perspective. Trying to do so is like trying to stop the wind with your hands. The more you struggle, the more exhausted you become. Accepting that control is an illusion does not mean giving up responsibility or becoming passive. It means understanding the difference between what is within your influence and what is not. You can influence your intentions, actions, and responses. You cannot dictate outcomes, reactions, or other people's behavior. Buddhism teaches wisdom through discernment. When you clearly see where your control ends, you stop wasting energy fighting battles that cannot be won. This clarity brings immediate relief to the mind. Anger often disguises itself as strength, but it is usually a sign of inner helplessness. When you feel unable to change a situation, anger rushes in to give the illusion of power. It creates movement where there is no real solution. Buddhism invites you to sit with this discomfort instead of reacting to it. When you allow yourself to feel the helplessness without judgment, you discover something surprising. Beneath the anger is acceptance. Beneath acceptance is peace. The practice of non-attachment plays a crucial role here. Attachment does not only mean clinging to people or possessions, it also means clinging to outcomes, expectations, and imagined futures. When you attach to how things should unfold, anger becomes inevitable. When you loosen this attachment, life feels lighter. You begin to respond flexibly instead of rigidly. You stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world. This does not make life dull or meaningless. It makes it spacious and resilient. As you practice accepting the limits of control, your reactions begin to change. When something goes wrong, you notice disappointment without collapsing into anger. When someone behaves unfairly, you set boundaries without hatred. When plans fail, you adapt instead of resisting. This shift does not happen overnight. It grows gradually as the mind learns to trust reality rather than fight it. Each time you choose acceptance over control, anger loses strength. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found by shaping the world to fit your desires, but by shaping your mind to meet the world wisely. When you stop trying to control what cannot be controlled, you reclaim your energy. You no longer argue with life internally. You stop asking, "Why won't this change?" and start asking, "How can I meet this moment with clarity?" In this question, Anger fades and understanding arises. Over time, accepting the illusion of control transforms your inner life. You become less reactive, more patient, and deeply grounded. Situations that once provoked anger now pass through without disturbance. You realize that true power does not come from control, but from flexibility, not from domination, but from understanding. In this acceptance, you find a calm that does not depend on circumstances, a peace that remains steady even when life refuses to cooperate. 7. Choose silence over reaction. One of the most misunderstood yet powerful teachings in Buddhism is the value of silence. Silence is often mistaken for weakness, avoidance, or suppression, but in Buddhist wisdom, silence is mastery. It is the space where awareness replaces impulse and wisdom replaces habit. Most anger does not arise because a situation is unbearable, but because the mind reacts faster than understanding. Words are spoken before clarity arrives, actions are taken before emotions settle. Buddhism teaches that the moment between stimulus and response is where freedom lives. Silence protects that moment. When someone provokes you, criticizes you, disrespects you, or misunderstands you, the instinct to react feels urgent. The body tightens, the mind races, and a response seems necessary to defend your dignity or correct the situation. But Buddhism invites you to pause, not to suppress what you feel, but to allow space for awareness to enter. Silence interrupts the automatic cycle of reaction. It prevents anger from turning into regret. What is not said in anger often becomes your greatest protection. Reaction is driven by ego. It wants to assert, defend, prove, or retaliate. Silence is driven by clarity. It asks, will responding now bring peace or create more disturbance? This question alone transforms how you engage with the world. Buddhism teaches that not every provocation deserves a response, and not every truth needs to be spoken immediately. Timing, intention, and awareness matter more than expression. Silence allows emotions to settle so that any response, if needed, comes from wisdom rather than heat. Many people fear silence because they believe it means losing power. In reality, silence removes the fuel that anger feeds on. When you react emotionally, you give others control over your inner state. You allow their words or actions to dictate your peace. When you choose silence, you reclaim that control. You show that your emotional stability does not depend on external behavior. Over time, people lose the ability to provoke you because they no longer receive the reaction they expect. Buddhism teaches restraint not as repression, but as conscious choice. Silence is not pretending you are unaffected. It is acknowledging your feelings without allowing them to rule you. When anger arises and you remain silent, you are not denying the emotion, you are giving it time to dissolve. Anger thrives on expression and repetition. Without these, it weakens naturally. Silence becomes a form of compassion toward yourself, protecting your nervous system and preserving your inner peace. Silence also creates clarity. When you do not react immediately, you gain perspective. You begin to see the situation more accurately. You may realize that the issue is not worth your energy. You may notice that the other person is acting from pain or ignorance. You may discover that responding later, calmly and firmly, is far more effective than reacting emotionally. Buddhism values right speech, which includes speaking at the right time, with the right intention, and for the right purpose. Silence helps you align with this principle. Over time, choosing silence changes your inner landscape. You become less impulsive and more grounded. You stop feeling the need to explain yourself to everyone. You stop defending your worth in every interaction. You realize that your peace is not something to be negotiated. This does not mean you never speak up. It means when you do, your words carry weight, clarity, and calm. They are not rushed or fueled by anger. They are deliberate and meaningful. Silence also teaches humility. It reminds you that not every thought needs expression, and not every emotion needs validation through action. Buddhism teaches that the self is not strengthened by constant assertion, but by understanding impermanence. Feelings pass, situations change. Words spoken in anger cannot be taken back. Silence allows impermanence to do its work. It lets emotions rise and fall without leaving damage behind. As this practice deepens, you notice a profound shift. Situations that once triggered anger now barely disturb you. You feel space where there used to be tension, calm where there used to be urgency. This is not because life has become easier, but because you have become wiser in how you meet it. Silence becomes a sanctuary, a place where you return to yourself before engaging with the world. In Buddhism, true strength is not loud. It is steady. It does not rush to defend itself. It does not need to dominate or convince. When you choose silence over reaction, you align with this strength. You protect your inner peace, preserve your dignity, and allow wisdom to guide your actions. Over time, anger loses its grip because it no longer finds an immediate outlet. What remains is clarity, restraint, and a deep, unshakable calm that no one can provoke. 8. Remember that anger hurts you first. One of the most direct and compassionate teachings in Buddhism is the clear understanding that anger never harms the other person first. It harms you. This truth is simple, but it is often ignored because anger disguises itself as strength, self-respect, or justice. In the moment, anger feels powerful. It feels like protection. It feels like a way to reclaim dignity or correct a wrong. But the Buddha offered a sobering insight. Anger is like grasping a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. Long before it reaches them, it burns your own hand. When anger arises, it immediately begins affecting your body. Your breath becomes shallow, your heart rate increases, your muscles tighten, stress hormones flood your nervous system. Buddhism does not separate the mind from the body. It understands that mental states create physical consequences. Repeated anger weakens the body over time, disturbing sleep, digestion, focus, and emotional balance. Even if the anger feels justified, the body pays the price. This is why Buddhism emphasizes compassion toward oneself as a foundation for inner peace. When you see clearly how anger damages your own well-being, the urge to protect it begins to fade. Anger also clouds perception. When the mind is angry, it narrows. It focuses only on what confirms its story and ignores anything that might soften or clarify the situation. You replay words, exaggerate intentions, and imagine motives that may not exist. Buddhism teaches that anger distorts reality. It makes small issues feel enormous, and temporary situations feel permanent. Decisions made from anger often lead to regret because they are made without full awareness. When the anger passes, clarity returns, but the consequences of words spoken or actions taken remain. Another way anger harms you is by keeping you mentally trapped in the past. Long after the event has ended, anger continues the conflict internally. You replay conversations, imagine arguments, and relive the emotional charge again and again. The other person may have moved on completely, unaware of your inner struggle, while you remain bound to the moment. Buddhism teaches that this is unnecessary suffering. The mind creates pain that no longer exists in reality. By holding on to anger, you allow a single moment to steal peace from many future moments. Anger also strengthens the ego's sense of separation. It creates an inner narrative of me versus them. Buddhism teaches that this sense of separation is at the root of suffering. When anger dominates, empathy disappears. Understanding shrinks. compassion feels impossible. Even if you believe the other person is wrong, anger hardens your heart and isolates you emotionally. This isolation is painful, even if it feels justified. When you release anger, you do not lose strength. You regain connection with yourself and with life as it is. The Buddha did not teach that anger should be suppressed or denied. He taught that it should be understood deeply. When you observe anger carefully, you notice that it does not actually solve the problem it claims to address. It does not bring peace. It does not heal the wound. It does not restore balance. It only creates more agitation. When this realization becomes clear through experience, not just logic, anger loses its appeal. You stop defending it. You stop feeding it with thoughts and justifications. Remembering that anger hurts you first also changes how you respond to provocation. Instead of asking, "Do I have the right to be angry?" you ask, "Is this worth the cost to my peace?" This question shifts your focus from righteousness to well-being. Buddhism teaches that wisdom chooses what leads to less suffering. When you see anger as self-harm rather than self-defense, letting go becomes an act of kindness toward yourself, not a moral obligation. Over time, this understanding creates a powerful inner boundary. You begin to recognize the early signs of anger and gently disengage before it fully takes hold. You may pause, breathe, or step away, not because you are weak, but because you value your inner health. You begin to protect your peace the way you would protect your body from harm. This protection is not aggressive. It is calm and intentional. As this practice deepens, anger loses its urgency. Situations that once felt unbearable now feel manageable. You realize that your peace is far more precious than momentary satisfaction or emotional release. You begin to experience a quieter strength, one that does not need to prove itself through reaction. Buddhism teaches that true victory is not over others, but over the impulses that disturb your mind. When you fully remember that anger hurts you first, compassion naturally arises not only for others, but for yourself. You stop punishing yourself with emotions that bring no benefit. You begin to choose clarity over chaos, calm over conflict, and understanding over reaction. In this choice, anger slowly dissolves, and what remains is a steady, grounded peace that no longer depends on what others say or do. 9. Practice loving kindness toward yourself first. One of the most overlooked causes of anger is not what others do, but how you relate to yourself. Buddhism teaches that anger often becomes intense and frequent when the inner world is already exhausted, neglected, or harsh. When you are constantly pushing yourself, judging yourself, or demanding perfection from yourself, the mind becomes fragile. In that fragile state, even small disturbances feel overwhelming. Words sting more deeply. Disrespect feels unbearable. Minor inconveniences feel like personal attacks. Buddhism reminds us that before we ask how to stop being angry with others, we must first look at how we treat ourselves. Many people believe anger is caused by external pressure, but in reality, it is often amplified by inner cruelty. When your inner voice is constantly critical, telling you that you are not enough, not doing enough, or not living correctly, you are already carrying tension. That tension looks for an outlet, and it often finds one through anger toward others. Buddhism teaches that the mind mirrors its own treatment. A mind that is harsh inwardly will react harshly outwardly. A mind that is gentle inwardly becomes resilient and calm in the face of difficulty. Loving kindness in Buddhism is not indulgence or weakness. It is a disciplined practice of relating to yourself with understanding instead of punishment. It means recognizing your limits without self-blame. It means acknowledging your pain without judging it. When anger arises, instead of attacking yourself for feeling disturbed, loving kindness asks, "What am I needing right now?" This question softens the inner atmosphere. Often, anger is not a sign that you are bad or reactive. It is a sign that something inside you is tired, hurt, or overwhelmed. When you practice loving kindness toward yourself, you stop using anger as a coping mechanism. Many people rely on anger to feel strong when they feel vulnerable inside. Anger creates the illusion of power, but it does not heal the underlying wound. Loving kindness addresses the root. It allows you to rest emotionally instead of constantly defending yourself. Buddhism teaches that when the mind feels safe within itself, it does not need to attack the outside world. This practice also changes how you interpret others' behavior. When you are kind to yourself, you become less defensive. You stop interpreting every comment as a threat. You stop assuming negative intent. This does not mean you become naive or passive. It means your nervous system is calmer, so it does not overreact. You gain the ability to pause and choose your response rather than being pulled by impulse. Loving kindness creates emotional space, and in that space, anger has less room to grow. Buddhism often begins loving kindness practice by directing compassion toward oneself before extending it to others. This is intentional. If you cannot treat yourself gently, attempts to forgive or tolerate others will feel forced and exhausting. But when self-compassion becomes natural, compassion toward others arises effortlessly. You no longer see every conflict as a personal failure or attack. You see it as part of human interaction, something that can be met with clarity rather than resentment. Practicing loving kindness also involves releasing unrealistic expectations of yourself. Many people carry anger because they feel they must always be calm, patient, and spiritually evolved. When they fail to meet this image, they become angry at themselves, and that anger spills outward. Buddhism teaches that imperfection is not a flaw. It is part of being human. When you allow yourself to be human without harsh judgment, anger loses its internal fuel. You stop fighting yourself, and as a result, you stop fighting the world. Over time, loving kindness reshapes your emotional habits. You begin to notice anger earlier and respond with care instead of criticism. You may take rest instead of pushing harder. You may choose silence instead of self-blame. You may forgive yourself for reacting imperfectly and gently return to awareness. This gentleness does not weaken you. It strengthens you by restoring balance to the mind. As this practice deepens, anger becomes less frequent and less intense. You realize that many situations that once bothered you only did so because you were already depleted. With inner nourishment, those same situations lose their emotional charge. You are no longer easily shaken because your stability comes from within, not from external validation or control. Buddhism teaches that peace is not created by force, discipline, or suppression alone. It is created through understanding and care. When you practice loving kindness toward yourself first, anger naturally fades because the mind no longer needs it. What remains is patience, resilience, and a quiet confidence that allows you to move through life without being constantly disturbed. This inner kindness becomes a refuge, a place you can return to no matter what happens outside. 10. Detach from the idea that everything is about you. Extended reflection. As this understanding deepens, you begin to see how much of your past anger was never truly about what happened, but about how the mind insisted on placing itself at the center of every experience. Buddhism teaches that the ego is not evil or wrong. It is simply a habit of perception. It constantly asks, how does this affect me? What does this say about me? Where do I stand in this? When life does not answer these questions in a reassuring way, Anger arises as a form of self-protection. But the Buddha's wisdom shows that this constant self-referencing is exhausting, and it is unnecessary. When you observe daily life carefully, you notice that people are mostly absorbed in their own inner worlds. They are worrying about their own problems, reacting to their own fears, replaying their own memories, and struggling with their own insecurities. Their tone, behavior, and decisions are shaped far more by what they are carrying inside than by who you are. When someone is impatient, it is usually because they are overwhelmed. When someone is dismissive, it is often because they feel insignificant themselves. When someone is harsh, it is often because they are at war with their own thoughts. Buddhism teaches that seeing this clearly dissolves resentment because you stop misinterpreting unconscious behavior as intentional harm. Detachment allows you to meet life without constantly tightening around it. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" you begin to ask, "What is actually happening here?" This shift brings you closer to reality and further away from suffering. Reality is neutral. It simply unfolds. Suffering begins when the mind insists that reality is a commentary on your worth, intelligence, or value. The more you release this insistence, the more spacious your inner life becomes. This practice also reveals how much energy is wasted on internal defense. When you believe everything is personal, you are always guarding yourself. You prepare arguments in advance. You rehearse explanations. You replay interactions to correct how you were perceived. Buddhism teaches that this constant self-defense is a form of tension that keeps the mind restless. When you detach, you drop the shield. You realize that you do not need to be understood by everyone to be at peace. You do not need approval to exist calmly. You do not need to correct every misunderstanding to remain whole. As detachment grows, emotional resilience naturally strengthens. Criticism no longer feels like an attack. Silence from others no longer feels like rejection. Differences of opinion no longer feel like threats. You can hear something disagreeable without immediately reacting because your identity is no longer on the line. Buddhism teaches that when the self is seen as fluid and impermanent, there is nothing rigid to defend. Anger fades because its purpose disappears. Detachment also brings humility, which is a quiet strength. Humility in Buddhism is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. It is the freedom of not needing to occupy the center of every narrative. When humility arises, you begin to experience life with curiosity instead of judgment. You observe situations without instantly labeling them as good or bad for you. This openness reduces emotional friction. The mind becomes flexible, and flexibility is one of the strongest antidotes to anger. With continued practice, you may notice moments where something that once would have triggered anger now barely registers. A comment passes without leaving a mark. A delay no longer feels insulting. Someone's bad mood no longer feels contagious. These moments are signs that detachment is taking root. You are no longer living from a constantly defended identity. You are living from awareness itself. Buddhism teaches that awareness does not need to be protected. It is vast enough to hold praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and discomfort. When you rest in awareness instead of ego, anger has no stable ground. It may arise briefly, but it cannot stay. There is nothing for it to cling to. This is not emotional numbness. It is emotional maturity. Ultimately, detaching from the idea that everything is about you allows you to live more lightly. You stop carrying invisible burdens. You stop assuming responsibility for others' moods. You stop interpreting randomness as intention. Life becomes simpler, quieter, and more direct. You respond when action is needed and let go when it is not. You speak when words are useful and remain silent when they are not. You no longer feel compelled to react to every wave because you trust the depth of the ocean within you. In this state, anger loses its authority completely, not because you have suppressed it, but because you have understood the misunderstanding that created it. You see clearly that most disturbances were never personal, never permanent, and never worth the cost of inner peace. What remains is a calm presence that moves through the world without resistance, grounded in the deep Buddhist insight that freedom comes not from controlling life, but from seeing it clearly and letting go. 11. Understand impermanence and stop feeding the fire. One of the most central teachings in Buddhism and one of the most powerful antidotes to anger is the understanding of impermanence. The Buddha taught that everything that arises will pass. Thoughts arise and fade, emotions surge and dissolve, situations change, people evolve. Nothing remains fixed, no matter how intense or personal it feels in the moment. Anger becomes overwhelming largely because the mind forgets this truth and treats a temporary experience as if it were permanent. When you believe that a feeling will last, that a situation will define you, or that a moment of disrespect will shape your entire life, anger tightens its grip. Impermanence loosens it. When anger appears, it often convinces you that it must be acted upon immediately. The mind says, "This is unacceptable. This cannot be allowed. I must respond now." Buddhism teaches that this urgency is an illusion. It is created by the mind's refusal to sit with discomfort. In reality, anger has a lifespan. If it is not fed by thoughts, stories, and reactions, it naturally weakens. Just as a fire dies without fuel, anger fades when it is not continually supplied with mental energy. Most people unknowingly keep anger alive by revisiting it again and again. They replay the event. They imagine alternate responses. They justify their feelings. They seek agreement from others. Each of these actions adds fuel to the fire. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not only caused by the initial emotion, but by the attachment that follows it. The moment you stop feeding anger with attention, it begins to lose strength. This is not suppression, it is wisdom. Understanding impermanence also changes how you view difficult people and situations. Someone who is rude today may be kind tomorrow. Someone who misunderstands you now may understand you later. Even if they do not change, your relationship to the situation will. Buddhism reminds us that holding on to anger assumes that the present moment defines the future. This assumption is rarely true. Life is fluid, and so are human beings. When you remember this, anger softens into patience. Impermanence also applies to your own inner state. You may feel calm one moment and irritated the next. Buddhism teaches that neither state defines you. You are not your anger, just as you are not your calm. Both are passing conditions. When you truly understand this, you stop fearing anger and stop identifying with it. You allow it to arise and pass without turning it into a problem. This acceptance removes its intensity. Another way impermanence dissolves anger is by changing how you interpret harm. Many people carry anger because they believe a single event has permanently damaged them. Buddhism teaches that no experience has the power to destroy your inner nature unless you cling to it. Pain may arise, but it does not stay unless it is held. When you stop clinging, even painful experiences become teachers rather than wounds. Anger fades when it no longer feels necessary for self-protection. The practice of impermanence also brings humility. You realize that your own reactions are not fixed truths. What feels unbearable today may feel insignificant tomorrow. What angers you now may later teach you patience. This realization creates space between you and your emotions. You stop treating every feeling as an emergency. You learn to wait, to breathe, to let time do its quiet work. Buddhism does not ask you to force anger away. It asks you to see clearly what keeps it alive. When you understand impermanence, you stop giving anger more meaning than it deserves. You stop building an identity around it. You stop carrying it into the future. You allow it to complete its natural cycle and disappear. As this understanding deepens, you begin to trust the passing nature of all things. You no longer panic when anger arises, because you know it will pass. You no longer rush to react, because you know clarity will return. You no longer cling to resentment, because you know it cannot survive without your cooperation. In Buddhism, freedom is not found by eliminating emotions, but by no longer feeding them unnecessarily. When you fully understand impermanence, anger loses its power because it is seen for what it truly is, a temporary visitor, not a permanent truth. And when you stop feeding the fire, what remains is calm awareness, steady, spacious, and free. 12. Cultivate equanimity, the unshakable balance of mind. At the deepest level of Buddhist practice lies equanimity, a calm, steady balance of mind that remains stable regardless of praise or blame, gain or loss, comfort or discomfort. Equanimity is not emotional numbness, indifference, or cold detachment. It is a profound inner stability that allows you to experience life fully without being thrown off balance by it. Anger loses its final stronghold when equanimity is cultivated, because equanimity removes the very conditions that allow anger to dominate the mind. Most anger arises because the mind swings violently between liking and disliking. When something pleases you, you cling to it. When something displeases you, you resist it. Buddhism teaches that this constant swinging creates exhaustion and suffering. Equanimity is the middle ground. It does not reject pleasure, nor does it fear discomfort. It understands that both are temporary experiences, arising and passing according to conditions. When the mind no longer clings or resists so strongly, anger has nowhere to take root. Equanimity begins with understanding, not force. You cannot command the mind to be calm. Calmness arises naturally when you see clearly. Buddhism teaches that everything you experience, people's behavior, emotional reactions, unexpected events, is the result of countless causes beyond your control. When this understanding deepens, the mind relaxes its grip. You stop demanding that life behave in a way that protects your comfort at all times. You stop interpreting every difficulty as a personal threat. In this relaxed understanding, equanimity slowly grows. A mind without equanimity reacts immediately. It judges quickly. It labels experiences as good or bad without investigation. Equanimity teaches the mind to pause. When something upsetting happens, instead of immediately reacting, the mind remains open and observant. You notice sensations, thoughts, and emotions without rushing to act on them. This pause is not passive, it is powerful. It allows wisdom to enter before habit takes control. Equanimity also changes how you relate to other people. Without it, you expect others to meet your emotional needs, behave according to your standards, and confirm your sense of self-worth. When they fail, anger follows. With equanimity, you stop placing these emotional demands on others. You understand that people will act according to their own conditioning. You no longer feel personally threatened by their limitations. This does not mean you tolerate harm or abandon boundaries. It means you enforce boundaries without hatred. You act firmly, but calmly. Anger is replaced by clarity. One of the most important aspects of equanimity is emotional self-trust. When you trust your ability to remain balanced, you no longer panic when strong emotions arise. You do not rush to suppress anger or express it immediately. You allow it to be present without fear. This trust dissolves inner conflict. Anger fades faster when it is met with steadiness rather than resistance. Equanimity also protects you from emotional manipulation. Many conflicts escalate because one person reacts emotionally, which encourages further provocation. When you remain balanced, you break this cycle. Your calm presence disrupts the emotional momentum. Others may continue to react, but their reactions no longer pull you into the storm. Over time, people sense that they cannot easily disturb you, and the dynamic changes naturally. Buddhism teaches that equanimity grows through consistent practice. It is cultivated through mindfulness, patience, and reflection. Each time you choose awareness over reaction, equanimity strengthens. Each time you accept discomfort without resistance, equanimity deepens. This is not a dramatic transformation, but a gradual one. The mind learns through repetition that calm is safer than conflict, and clarity is stronger than anger. Equanimity also reshapes how you experience success and failure. Without it, success creates attachment and fear of loss, while failure creates anger and self-blame. With equanimity, both success and failure are seen as temporary conditions. You learn from them without being defined by them. This balanced perspective removes many hidden sources of anger, especially anger toward yourself. As equanimity matures, you notice a profound shift in daily life. Situations that once provoked irritation now feel manageable. Delays, misunderstandings, and imperfections no longer disturb your inner peace as deeply. You still care, but you care without suffering. You still engage, but you engage without emotional violence. Life feels more spacious because the mind is no longer constantly bracing itself against discomfort. At its deepest level, equanimity is an expression of wisdom. It reflects the understanding that life cannot be controlled, only met with awareness. When you stop fighting reality, reality stops feeling like an enemy. Anger dissolves not because you force it away, but because the mind no longer needs it as a defense. In Buddhism, equanimity is described as a mind that is like a mountain. Storms may pass around it, but it remains unmoved. This does not mean the mountain feels nothing. It means it is rooted deeply enough to remain stable. When you cultivate equanimity, you develop this inner rootedness. You no longer live at the mercy of emotions, opinions, or circumstances. This is the final freedom from anger, not the absence of emotion, but the presence of balance. When equanimity is established, anger may still arise occasionally, but it no longer dominates, controls, or defines you. It passes quietly, like a cloud moving across the sky. What remains is clarity, steadiness, and a deep inner peace that cannot be taken away. 13. Let go of the past. Stop reopening old wounds. One of the most hidden yet powerful sources of anger is the mind's habit of living in the past. Buddhism teaches that much of our suffering does not come from what is happening now, but from what we keep revisiting internally. Old conversations, past betrayals, moments of disrespect, unresolved conflicts, and emotional wounds are replayed again and again, long after the situation itself has ended. Each replay reactivates the same anger, as if the event were happening all over again. The Buddha taught that this attachment to the past is a form of self-inflicted suffering, and releasing it is essential for true peace. When something painful happens, the initial pain may be unavoidable, but what follows is optional. The mind often believes that revisiting the past will bring understanding, closure, or justice. In reality, it usually brings agitation and resentment. Buddhism teaches that the past no longer exists except as memory, and memory itself is unstable. Each time you recall an event, you are not reliving the truth of what happened, but a mental reconstruction shaped by your current emotions, beliefs, and conditioning. This means that anger toward the past is often directed at a distorted image, not reality itself. Holding on to past anger feels protective. The mind believes that by remembering hurt, it can prevent it from happening again. But Buddhism points out a deeper truth. Clinging to resentment does not protect you. It keeps you trapped. It anchors your emotional state to moments that are already gone. You may believe you are staying vigilant, but in reality, you are staying wounded. The Buddha taught that freedom comes not from remembering pain, but from understanding it and letting it pass. One of the reasons letting go of the past is difficult is because anger becomes part of identity. You may unconsciously define yourself by what you endured, how you were wronged, or how unfairly you were treated. Buddhism teaches that identity based on suffering is fragile and heavy. When you release the past, it can feel like losing a part of yourself. But what you are actually losing is the burden, not the meaning. The wisdom remains, but the pain does not have to. Letting go does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means acknowledging what happened without allowing it to control your present moment. Buddhism teaches that awareness transforms experience. When you look at past pain with clarity instead of resistance, you see that it has already changed you. You survived it. You learned from it. It does not need to keep hurting you to remain meaningful. Anger becomes unnecessary when its lesson has already been learned. The mind often replays the past because it wants a different ending. You imagine what you should have said, how others should have acted, or how things could have turned out differently. Buddhism teaches that this longing for a rewritten past is a form of attachment. The past cannot be corrected, only understood. Each time you mentally revisit it with anger, you deepen the attachment and strengthen the suffering. When you accept that the past is complete, even if it was painful, the mind begins to release its grip. Letting go of the past also requires forgiveness, not necessarily of others, but of yourself. Many people carry anger because they regret how they reacted, what they tolerated, or what they failed to see earlier. Buddhism teaches self-forgiveness as an act of wisdom. You acted according to the awareness you had at the time. Blaming yourself now does not change the past. It only poisons the present. When you forgive yourself, anger softens, and compassion takes its place. Another reason past anger persists is fear of vulnerability. You may believe that if you let go, you will be hurt again. Buddhism teaches that clinging to pain does not prevent future pain. It only prevents healing. True strength comes from presence, not from armor made of resentment. When you release the past, you are not lowering your guard. You are strengthening your awareness. Awareness is far more effective than anger in protecting you. As you practice letting go, you may notice resistance. Old memories may resurface unexpectedly. Buddhism does not teach forceful forgetting. It teaches gentle release. When memories arise, you observe them without judgment and without feeding them. You do not argue with them, and you do not cling to them. You let them pass like clouds in the sky. Over time, they lose emotional charge. What once triggered anger becomes neutral memory. Letting go of the past also brings you fully into the present. Anger cannot survive in full presence. It requires memory or anticipation to exist. When you anchor yourself in what is happening now, the breath, the body, the immediate environment, the mind has less space to reopen old wounds. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is the only place where peace can be experienced. The past can teach, but it cannot heal you now. As this practice deepens, you begin to feel lighter. Emotional space opens where there was once heaviness. You stop carrying old stories into new situations. You meet people as they are now, not as reminders of someone from before. This clarity transforms relationships and inner life alike. You respond to the present instead of reacting to the past. In Buddhism, liberation is described as freedom from unnecessary suffering. Much of that suffering comes from refusing to let time do its work. When you finally release the past, anger loses one of its strongest anchors. You realize that peace does not require revisiting pain, proving injustice, or holding on to resentment. Peace requires presence, understanding, and the courage to let go. When you stop reopening old wounds, healing completes itself. Anger fades, not because you forced it away, but because it no longer has a story to cling to. What remains is a quiet strength rooted in the present moment, a strength that allows you to move forward without dragging the weight of yesterday behind you. 14. Make peace with human imperfection, yours and theirs. One of the final roots of anger dissolves when you deeply accept a truth that Buddhism has emphasized for centuries. Human beings are imperfect by nature. Not occasionally imperfect, not imperfect only when stressed, but imperfect at all times. We forget this truth easily, especially when expectations are high, emotions are involved, or we believe that awareness should automatically lead to flawless behavior. Anger survives wherever perfection is expected in an imperfect world. When you truly make peace with imperfection, your own and others' anger begins to lose its final refuge. Much anger is born from the silent belief that people should behave better, know better, and act more consciously once they reach a certain age, role, or level of closeness. You expect understanding from those who lack emotional awareness. You expect consistency from those who are internally conflicted. You expect kindness from those who have never learned how to give it. Buddhism teaches that these expectations, while understandable, are misaligned with reality. People do not act according to what should be true. They act according to what they are capable of in each moment. When you resist this truth, anger becomes your protest. You feel offended that someone failed to meet a standard you believed was obvious. But Buddhism gently reminds you that clarity cannot be demanded. Awareness cannot be forced. Emotional maturity cannot be rushed. Each person is unfolding at their own pace, shaped by countless causes and conditions you may never see. When you truly accept this, frustration softens into understanding. Not approval, understanding. This acceptance must also be extended inward. Many people carry deep anger toward others because they are secretly angry with themselves. You judge yourself harshly for past mistakes, emotional reactions, boundaries you failed to set, or signs you ignored. That self-judgment creates tension. Tension seeks release. Often, it is released as irritation, impatience, or anger toward others. Buddhism teaches that self-compassion is not optional on the path to peace. If you expect perfection from yourself, you will inevitably expect it from others and suffer when neither delivers. Making peace with imperfection does not mean lowering standards or tolerating harm. It means adjusting expectations to reality. You can maintain boundaries without resentment. You can recognize limitations without hatred. You can protect your peace without demanding that people change first. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is the ability to see clearly and respond skillfully. When you accept imperfection, your responses become calmer, more precise, and far less emotionally charged. One of the most freeing realizations that arises from this practice is understanding that disappointment is often the gap between expectation and reality. When expectations are unrealistic, disappointment is guaranteed. Anger is simply disappointment that has hardened. When you soften expectations not by becoming pessimistic, but by becoming realistic, you close that gap. Fewer things surprise you, fewer behaviors feel shocking, fewer moments trigger emotional upheaval. The mind becomes steady because it is no longer constantly correcting reality. This acceptance also transforms how you interpret mistakes. Instead of seeing errors as personal failures or insults, you see them as natural outcomes of human limitation. Buddhism teaches that error is not the opposite of wisdom. It is often the doorway to it. When someone makes a mistake, including you, anger is no longer the default response. Curiosity replaces blame. Learning replaces punishment. Growth replaces resentment. As you continue practicing this perspective, you begin to notice a quiet shift. Situations that once irritated you now feel predictable. Not because you have become cynical, but because you have become clear. You no longer expect perfect communication, perfect timing, perfect understanding, or perfect behavior. You expect humanity. And because of that, you are rarely emotionally ambushed. Accepting imperfection also reduces the burden of control. When you stop expecting people to behave ideally, you stop trying to manage them emotionally. You stop correcting every flaw, pointing out every inconsistency, or taking responsibility for others' growth. Buddhism teaches that each person must walk their own path. Your peace depends not on fixing others, but on understanding them accurately. This understanding brings humility. You recognize that you too are learning. You too have blind spots. You too will sometimes act from habit rather than awareness. When this humility is present, anger finds no justification. There is nothing to defend and no one to defeat. There is only learning, adapting, and continuing forward with greater clarity. Making peace with imperfection ultimately creates emotional spaciousness. Life feels less heavy. Interactions feel less personal. You become more patient, not because you are forcing patience, but because there is less resistance inside you. Resistance is what creates heat. Acceptance cools it. In Buddhism, peace is not achieved by removing all difficulties from life. It is achieved by removing the inner demand that life and people be other than what they are. When you finally release the expectation of perfection, anger dissolves naturally. What remains is a grounded compassion, a steady clarity, and a deep understanding that human beings are learning as they go, just like you. 15. Live from awareness, not from emotion, the final freedom from anger. The deepest freedom from anger comes when you stop living from emotion and begin living from awareness. Buddhism teaches that emotions are not enemies, but they are also not leaders. They are messages, signals, temporary movements within the mind and body. Suffering begins when emotions are placed in charge of decisions, identity, and behavior. Anger becomes destructive, not because it appears, but because it is believed, obeyed, and defended. Awareness ends this pattern completely. Most people live reactively without realizing it. Something happens outside, an emotion arises inside, and action follows immediately. There is no pause, no observation, no space. This is emotional living. In this mode, anger feels unavoidable because it is automatic. Buddhism offers another way of living, awareness-based living. In this way, emotions are experienced fully, but they are not allowed to dictate actions. Awareness stands between stimulus and response like a calm guardian. Awareness is not cold or detached. It is deeply present and alive. When anger arises, awareness notices it without panic. It notices the tightening in the body, the racing thoughts, the urge to react. But it does not rush to act. This pause is everything. In that pause, anger loses its command. It becomes something you feel, not something you are. Living from awareness means you stop asking, "How do I feel about this?" and start asking, "What is happening right now?" This subtle shift changes everything. Feelings fluctuate constantly. Awareness remains steady. When you anchor yourself in awareness, emotions pass through without taking control. Anger may arise, but it does not stay long enough to cause damage. Buddhism teaches that awareness is your true nature. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, roles change, situations shift, but awareness remains constant. When you identify with awareness instead of emotion, anger loses its authority. It has nothing to attach to. You no longer say, "I am angry." You say, "Anger is present." This language reflects a deeper truth. You are the space in which anger appears, not the anger itself. This way of living transforms daily life. When someone speaks harshly, awareness hears the words without immediately reacting. When something goes wrong, awareness notices disappointment without turning it into blame. When expectations are unmet, awareness recognizes frustration without feeding it. Each moment becomes an opportunity to remain rooted instead of reactive. Living from awareness also frees you from regret. Many people suffer not only from anger, but from the consequences of anger: words spoken, relationships damaged, trust broken. Awareness prevents this chain reaction. When awareness is present, you may still choose to speak or act, but your actions come from clarity rather than impulse. You respond, not react. Responses heal. Reactions harm. This practice does not remove emotion from life. It restores balance. You still feel joy, sadness, concern, and passion, but these emotions flow through you instead of controlling you. Anger becomes a brief visitor rather than a destructive force. It appears, communicates something, and leaves. Living from awareness also deepens compassion. When you are not ruled by emotion, you see others more clearly. You recognize that their reactions are also conditioned, emotional, and often unconscious. This understanding does not excuse harm, but it removes hatred. You set boundaries without hostility. You disengage without resentment. You protect your peace without needing to punish anyone. As awareness strengthens, you notice something profound. The space between triggers and reactions grows naturally. You no longer need to force calm. Calm arises on its own because awareness is already calm. Anger loses urgency. Situations feel manageable. Life feels slower, not because things move less, but because you are no longer rushing internally. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not found in controlling emotions, but in seeing them clearly. When you live from awareness, you stop fighting anger and stop feeding it. You let it be what it is, a temporary movement in the mind. This is the final teaching because it unites all the others. Awareness contains acceptance, compassion, detachment, impermanence, and equanimity within it. When awareness is present, anger has no root, no fuel, and no future. To live from awareness is to live freely. You are no longer a prisoner of mood, reaction, or circumstance. You are present, steady, and grounded. Anger may knock, but it is no longer invited in. What remains is a deep, quiet peace, one that does not depend on people, situations, or outcomes. This is the peace Buddhism points toward. This is the peace that cannot be taken away. To never feel angry again does not mean you will never experience irritation, frustration, or emotional discomfort. Buddhism never promises a life without feeling. What it offers is something far more profound: freedom from being ruled by feeling. Throughout these teachings, you have seen that anger is not an enemy to defeat, but a misunderstanding to dissolve. It survives on unconscious habits, expectation, attachment, control, ego, and identification. When these habits are seen clearly, anger loses its foundation. Anger arises when the mind argues with reality. It fades when the mind learns to understand reality. Each teaching has gently removed one layer of confusion, bringing you closer to clarity. You learned that anger is a reaction, not a truth. That people act from their own conditioning, that life does not owe fairness, that observation weakens emotion, that validation is not required for peace, that control is an illusion, that silence is strength, that anger harms you first, that kindness toward yourself softens the mind, that not everything is personal, that impermanence dissolves urgency, that equanimity stabilizes the heart, that the past no longer needs to be relived, that imperfection is natural, and finally, that awareness, not emotion, is your true home. When these understandings are lived, not just known, anger no longer finds a place to settle. It may still arise briefly, like a ripple on the surface of water, but it no longer becomes a storm. You do not suppress it. You do not justify it. You simply see it. And in seeing, it releases itself. This path is not about becoming passive, silent, or indifferent. It is about becoming clear, grounded, and emotionally free. You still set boundaries. You still protect your values. You still act when action is needed, but you do so without hatred, without urgency, and without inner violence. Your strength becomes quiet. Your calm becomes unshakable. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found by changing the world, but by understanding the mind. When the mind no longer clings, resists, or identifies, suffering ends naturally. Anger dissolves because it is no longer needed as a defense. As you walk this path, remember that freedom from anger is not achieved in a single moment. It unfolds through awareness, patience, and gentle practice. Each time you pause instead of react, each time you choose understanding over blame, each time you return to awareness instead of emotion, you move closer to lasting peace. And one day, you will notice something quietly miraculous. The situations that once controlled you no longer do. The words that once hurt you no longer penetrate. The anger that once felt inevitable no longer arrives. In its place is a steady, spacious calm, a peace that does not depend on anyone or anything. This is not the absence of life's challenges. This is the presence of inner freedom.